Hi, everybody. Welcome back to English 90, and this is our class for Monday, the 13th of September. You'll remember I'm indicating that, or I indicated last class that what I'm going to be doing is posting videos for every Monday and Wednesday, because if we were meeting in person, that's when we would be meeting on Monday and Wednesday. And the last video that I posted last week was supposed to be for our Wednesday class, though you might have been able to access it on the Tuesday, which was the start of the semester. And basically, I reviewed the syllabus and I reviewed the course outline. So if you've got any questions about the syllabus or the course outline, please let me know. If you'll remember, I set aside some optional times for chats and Zooms that you can participate in for our class, but you can always contact me at any point via email or through telephone, and I can clarify things as well. The one thing that I didn't get a chance really to talk about last class was about plagiarism. So I thought that I would do that now. And there's a section on our syllabus about plagiarism, which is basically taking somebody else's language or taking somebody else's ideas and not giving them credit. If you do give them credit, you're doing something called research, which is one of the skills that you will be learning in college. That's important. But if you don't give credit, it makes it sound like the information is yours when it's not. So, in other words, it's comparable to theft. It's known as stealing somebody's intellectual property rather than stealing somebody's possession. And the consequences can be rather significant. If you were to be caught and you got off easy, so to speak, basically you would fail that assignment. But if you didn't get off easy, you could actually be expelled from college with a notation on your transcript that you plagiarized. So it's pretty serious. One of the things that this class is going to do, this will be towards the ending of the semester, is talk about how to give credit to somebody else's language or idea so that we aren't plagiarizing. So don't worry about that at this particular point. Now, I always give two stories, though, about plagiarism to try to encourage people not to plagiarize. So I thought I'd share these with you. The first actually happened to me in the early days of my teaching career. So this would be in the early days of the internet. And I'm reading a paper and it sounds familiar to me. And I'm trying to think, where have I read this before? And I couldn't rely on the internet because it was, again, the very early days of the internet. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are websites now that basically assist students in their attempt to plagiarize. But there are also websites online that assist teachers in trying to determine if their students are plagiarizing. One of those websites, one of my favorites, is called turnitin.com, where I can type in a sentence or several sentences and then it does an electronic search for me to try to find the original source. But at any rate, I didn't have access to any of that. I had to rely on my memory. And it didn't take me long to remember where I read this before. It was from our own textbook that I assigned for the class. And I'm still stunned that the student thought I wouldn't recognize it. There were a few mechanical errors in it, in the production that the student gave me and in the writing the student gave me. I don't know if this was because the student just was a poor plagiarist and copied in a sloppy manner, or if they were trying to fool me by having some mistakes in there. But that's my personal story. But there's a better story that happened around the same time period, early days of the internet. And it was actually in all the academic newspapers. It was so surprising. Yes, there is such a thing as academic newspapers. And it happened to a middle-aged professor. That part's important. So this middle-aged professor is reading a series of papers and comes across a paper that sounds familiar. He realizes, I know I've seen this somewhere before. Where have I seen it? And of course, again, early days of internet, he can't rely on an internet search. And then it occurs to him finally, he hadn't read it. He had written it before, decades earlier, when he himself was an undergraduate student in college. It was one of his old papers, believe it or not. And I know the odds, 1 in a million. It had something to do with the fraternity that was recycling old pages or old papers from old fraternity members. And somehow, some way, this paper This professor's paper from when he was an undergraduate decades ago got into the hands of one of his current students, and his current student handed it in as if it was the current student's work. So not only was the student plagiarizing, but then the student was also in the media for what happened and how it happened. So I always give these two stories to encourage you not to plagiarize, because I know plagiarism is, well, I liken it to something like cheating on your taxes. It's not difficult to do and it's tempting to do, but if you get caught, oh boy, you're in trouble. And as I indicated, that by the ending of the semester, we'll talk about how to give credit to somebody else's writing so that you're not plagiarizing. And at the beginning of the semester, where we are now, you're doing the kinds of writing where you're talking about yourself, your own opinions, and your own experiences. So hopefully that would take away any temptation to plagiarize. Plagiarism is usually a pretty deliberate kind of act when you are asking somebody else, for instance, to do your homework for you. So at least that's what I've found over the course of my career. So today I had some topics that I wanted to discuss. I'm well aware that many of you might still be adding or dropping and trying to get a hold of the textbook and so forth. So I didn't want to assign anything from the textbook for the first couple of classes until everybody got their feet wet, so to speak, and had an opportunity to settle in. So what I've done is I've selected topics that I can provide either links to or text to. What I would have done in class is given you handouts. And you can see that below this video, I've got the notes for the class where all of this information is. I wanted to talk about attitudes about writing. That seemed like a really good way to begin, is to talk about how do we feel about writing, since this is a writing class. Also, to talk about learning styles, the different ways that people learn, which is something that is applicable to your entire educational experience. What is the best way for you to learn? Also talk about word processing, email, and internet, at least briefly, since I suspect you probably already have some background in all of these. And then finally give you an opportunity to do a little bit of writing for the class. So I'll begin with attitudes about writing. And there's a section that I usually photocopy and distribute as a handout that I have typed up below this video with some questions that I wanted you to ask yourself. And the first question is, how much practice did you have writing compositions in high school? Was it much practice, some practice, or a little bit of practice? And then the second question is, how much feedback on your compositions, which would be either positive or negative comments, did your teachers give you? Much, some, or little? And then the third question is, how did your teachers seem to regard your writing? Did they think it was good? Did they think it was fair? Or did they think it was poor? And then the next question is, do you think that some people have a gift for writing and others don't? And the possibilities are yeah, yes, sometimes, or no. And then the last question, when do you start writing a paper? And the options are several days before it's due, about a week before it's due, or at the last possible minute. And the reason why I like starting with these particular questions is because I really think it's the foundation of writing. The first, how much practice did you have writing in high school? Certainly, if you haven't had much practice in writing, or if you haven't done it in a while, it's going to feel uncomfortable. How much feedback did you get on your writing when you submitted in your assignments? If you didn't get much feedback at all, or even no feedback, or if most of the feedback was negative, I wouldn't at all be surprised if you felt uncomfortable about writing. Do you feel some people have a gift for writing? And actually, I do personally feel that some people have a gift for writing. And those individuals might want to consider becoming English teachers or professional writers. But most of us are not English teachers or professional writers. In other words, you don't need to have a particular gift in order to write and to improve your writing. It's the same with any skill. Take something like sports, like playing basketball. Some of us have a gift for playing basketball. Those individuals probably become professional basketball players. But that's not to say that the rest of us can't learn how to play basketball and even improve over time with practice and with help, even though we'll never get to the level of being able to play professionally. And it's the same with writing. and that you don't have to be a professional. You just want to be competent at it, good enough at it so that you can write in school and write at work. And more writing, especially through things like social media, is also done electronically for personal reasons. And then when you start writing a paper, and my suspicion is you know what the answer is supposed to be. You're supposed to start as soon as possible. The reality is that most people start at the last possible minute, and they're making the exercise much more difficult for themselves. And it's one of the things that I'm going to be emphasizing over the course of the semester. To start early, do it in small pieces. You'll get a much better piece of writing than trying to do it all at once. But as I said, we'll talk about this as the semester progresses when we talk about writing. Now, learning styles, the different ways that people learn. So this is the next section and the notes below that I wanted to talk about. And it's one of the things that you may already know about yourself, but it could also be something that you still need to discover about yourself. That we all learn in different ways, and we probably all learn through a lot of different ways, but chances are that you have strengths in the way that you learn and weaknesses in the way that you learn. But since we're all different, it's going to be all different for everybody in the class. Basically, it's divided up into 3 different learning styles or ways of learning. The first is visual, that your strength in learning is through seeing things. So in other words, reading the textbook or paying attention to what's on a whiteboard, for instance. But some of us learn through auditory means or hearing. That means listening to, let's say, what's going on in a class. Or perhaps it's listening to your peers, or even you reading out loud to yourself or having somebody else read to you. And then the last is tactile, which is actually touching or doing the thing. Now, schools tend to focus on visual and auditory and not so much on tactile. So chances are that if you've gotten this far in your educational career, you have some strength with visual and auditory learning. One of the things I suggest is that you might want to think about how you deal with directions. That might give you a sense into your preferred learning style. And that if you are the kind of person that needs to see the directions written out, let's say through MapQuest, I'm one of these people, then you probably learn through seeing. If you are one of the people who learn through hearing, then chances are you need to hear somebody tell you how to get there. So maybe your GPS telling you the directions of how to proceed. Now, if you're a tactile or a person that likes to do things, then you actually have to drive there probably at least once. And then once you've done that, you probably feel comfortable with how to get to that particular location. And again, we tend to be mixtures of all 3. If you're the kind of person who likes maps, though those sometimes seem like a kind of old-fashioned way of proceeding with directions, you might learn through pictures because maps are very visually oriented. They're not dependent on words, but they are dependent on images. Again, this isn't foolproof and we all learn in different ways, but there was a survey that I wanted you to take about different learning styles. And you can see in the notes below, this is in section 3 under learning styles. You've got a link to get to that survey. It's 20 questions. If we were meeting in class, we would do it in person, but we're not meeting in class, so I'm going to ask you to take that survey. You can take that survey at the ending of this particular video. And basically, the questions are just for your eyes only. It shouldn't take you long to take it. And at the ending, they will do a compilation and will tell you, at least from their perspective, again, this is all done electronically, no humans are involved, which is your preferred learning style, which is your strength with learning. Mine ended up being auditory, which I think I already knew. I'm the kind of person that needs to say things out loud in order to really understand them. For instance, when I'm writing, I always read my writing out loud to myself to see what it sounds like, which is a suggestion that I'm going to have for you. Though I have very strong skills with visual and seeing as well, and that makes sense because I read a lot. I'm an English teacher. My weakness is in tactile or in doing. So I learn better through, let's say, reading the directions and trying to figure it out on my own, let's say. But again, I hope that you take the survey and that it is of some use to you. It may confirm what you already suspected about the way you learn. And in fact, in some of the upcoming readings that we're going to be doing, we will be talking more about learning styles and study skills. But the survey might tell you something that's a little bit different than what you were expecting. And I encourage you to consider that with your own studying for this class and for other classes. And particularly if you learn visually through seeing, then you really do have to read the textbook. Everybody does, but especially people who learn through seeing. If you learn through hearing, you really do have to listen to these videos. Everybody needs to listen to these videos, but especially if you learn through hearing. And if you learn through doing, you'll notice that the textbook has a good number of exercises connected with it. Now, I'm not going to be assigning those exercises for you to do. I'm just going to assign you the readings to do. But you might, on your own, might want to do some of these exercises just for your own benefit because you learn through doing. Occasionally, I will assign an exercise for all of us to do in class. But keep that in mind as we start getting to the readings in the book. All of those exercises are not exercises that you have to do. What I would do if I were a student in this class is that I would do the reading, and then if I felt that I really wasn't understanding very well the concepts, then I would do some of the exercises. If I felt that I was very comfortable with the concepts, then I would skip the exercises and go on to the next reading. And certainly if you do the exercises and you're not quite certain if you've got the correct answers, you can always ask me, and I'll be happy to give you feedback on that. So the next section was on word processing, email, and internet. And again, my suspicion is that at this point in our society, especially because you're taking an online class, you have some comfort level with using computers, word processing, email, and internet. But I try not to assume much of anything in our world. You'll see that I have a whole bunch of links. This is in section 4 that could be of use to you. The first, which you may or may not be familiar with, is GCC has a technology lending library. Our library can lend out things. For instance, Chromebooks, laptops, MacBooks, Wi-Fi hotspots. They go pretty quickly. And in fact, we have an upcoming library tour where that will be discussed in further depth. But I wanted you to know that that was available. You can always go onto the GCC library website and learn more about the library on your own, though I'll be addressing that as well in class. My hope is that next class, I'll be able to show you a video from the library as well as give you resources. But you'll notice that next class I have listed library tour with a quotation mark because I'm not necessarily sure the library will have their video ready by then. And if not, I'll just find an alternate activity for us to do, so you don't have to worry about that. Again, if we were live, we would actually go to the library itself. And I encourage you to go to the library itself. It is open. But if you don't feel comfortable going to campus, I certainly understand that. And it's certainly you can do much, if not almost all, electronically through the library if you so wanted to. That's one of the things we'll talk about with the library tour. Microsoft Word, and I don't know if you're using for your word processing program Microsoft Word, or perhaps you're using Google Docs, or maybe you're using something else. They all basically work on the same principle, and they're supposed to be pretty intuitive so that you've got rulers and little icons and pictures that help direct you with your typing so that you can make determinations about what font or style of text you are going to be using, and size, and whether you're going to bold it or italicize it or things of that nature. So I've got a link here about how to use Microsoft Word, which is a brief video, which I think does a good job of introducing Word if you're not that familiar with it. And I've also got a link here for using Google Docs. Same sort of idea about how to approach using Google Docs if you've never used it before. My suspicion is you've used both or at least one over the course of your time. When we begin talking about writing, we'll start talking about some of the conventions or the expectations of writing a paper. Usually it's considered that you use a particular font size, 11 or 12. I like 12. and a font that's considered to be fairly academic and standard, something like Times New Roman, for instance. Nothing weird, so that it's like let's say graffiti or something like that. But again, we'll talk more about that when we start talking about actually handing in paper. Now, again, obviously, you aren't going to be handing in physical papers in this class. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to hand in electronically a PDF of your document. Now, a PDF is just a different way to save the document. It saves it as a picture. And the reason why I would like a PDF is because the grading program that I'm using, the electronic grading program that I'm using, works with PDFs. So if you are not familiar on how to turn your Microsoft Word or your Google Docs document into a PDF, I've also included links below, that's in the 4th section, about how to create a Word PDF or how to create a Docs PDF. And I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but again, if you run into trouble, just let me know and I'll be happy to assist you. I've also got some links about the GCC email system. My assumption is that you are pretty familiar with using GCC email, but if you're not, if you go onto that link for the help desk, they'll be able to give you some suggestions. If nothing else, I'm going to be asking that you send in your PDFs to my email because, again, that's what works best for my grading program. That probably is not something that you're going to be finding in other classes. We all do it differently now. But there is a link on how to use GCC email and how to access your email if you haven't already done so. There also is a link for GCC Moodle, and my suspicion is you know something about Moodle because you are watching this. However, there are more elements associated with Moodle, and you can click on that link and it will give you additional details about Moodle, especially frequently asked questions associated with both GCC email and also GCC Moodle. And then finally, My GCC, which is basically your individual portal to your specific information on campus. Your name, your contact information, your financial aid, your grades, your schedule, all of that kind of stuff. So that's where you can look up all of that information. Your advisor, you've been, if you haven't already, will be scheduled or assigned an advisor, somebody that will help you when it comes time to register for classes, pick new classes next semester, and also someone that you can contact if you needed to talk to somebody about your academic performance and you didn't want to necessarily speak to the specific teacher of the class. You can always speak to your advisor. And again, you can look all of that up on My GCC, and there's information on how to do that. Basically, the systems are all pretty similar. Usually they are password protected, and that the way you get in is last name, first initial, last 4 digits of your ID. Your ID card will be very important, and then whatever password that you've selected for yourself. But again, if you're having any difficulties, please feel free to contact me. There also is a link on GCC frequently asked tech questions, just in general. And we also have a GCC technology help desk, so that if you're having problems with technology and you didn't want to contact me or you couldn't contact me, you could also contact the GCC help desk. They are available from 9 to 5 during weekdays. There are some tech tutorials too that they've included so that perhaps you can teach yourself if you're having a question about technology, and I've included the link for that as well. And it talks about things like Moodle and PowerPoint and other things about technology you might be interested in. When we get to word processing, one of the things that I'm going to emphasize about word processing, regardless of what program you're using, is that the real benefit of word processing is that you can cut and paste text. You can move text around very easily. And there's a reason why we call it cut and paste, because prior to computers, literally, if you wanted to move text around so that you could have different drafts, you would have to cut out pieces of your writing and paste it into other places. So that's where that term comes from. So obviously, it's much easier for you to save multiple versions of your writing. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about, that one of the best ways to go about your writing is to write in drafts and to write multiple versions. And each version you write probably will get better and better until you get to the final version that you actually hand in to class. So as I indicated, our next class will probably be about using the GCC library, but if it turns out that I hit some kind of snag with that, I'll change some things around. There is no reading that's assigned for next class. And again, that was deliberate because I wanted you to spend some time actually getting ready with your textbooks and so forth. And what I wanted to do was for the rest of today's class is have you do a writing sample so that I could get a sense as to what your writing looked like. Now, I'm aware that you all briefly answered the discussion forum question, or I hope you all answered the discussion forum question, where you told the class a little bit about yourself, and I would have responded to that. So you should look for my response. And I indicated you don't have to respond to your peers, but I do encourage you to read the responses of your peers because it mimics what we would have talked about in class. If you do decide to respond to your peers, it's much like class discussion, as if you were raising your hand to contribute something in class. And for today's discussion forum question, it's not going to be on a discussion forum. It's going to be a writing sample where I'm going to ask you to give me a sample of your writing, which means I'm going to ask you to write on something. And I want to give you very little direction. So I just want to see what you would produce without me giving you any real instruction. And this will count as today's attendance. It will not be graded, so you don't need to worry about that. You can write as much or as little as you like. Again, I'm deliberately not giving you instructions. What I am going to do is to give you 2 questions or 2 prompts and ask you to choose one, just one, and respond to that to me in writing. And the first question is, I think you'll understand why I'm asking it. Why did you enroll in English 90? And this is the important part. What do you hope to learn? It's perfectly okay to say you enrolled in English 90 because you needed to, you had to. I'm much more interested in finding out what you hope to learn. And also, how can I help you learn? Again, I'm not giving you any direction on how much or how little to write or how to go about writing it. I just want you to respond to that so that I can look at your writing, look at the class's writing as a whole, and also the information is useful to me about how I can help you learn. So that's one option. That's option A. If you don't like that option, you can choose option B. Remember, choose one of the 2. Option B is the most blank experience I had this year was blank. And your job is to fill in the blanks, but also to do a little bit of writing after that. So you can answer that however way you want. You might say the most wonderful experience I had this year was when I got married and talk about that. You could talk about the most horrible experience I had this year was when I got married and talk about that. I guess it depends on the marriage. It could be 100% truth, 100% lie, someplace in between your response to this. I'm not going to necessarily judge you based on what you're writing. So if you wanted to write about how you were abducted by space aliens and it was such a unique experience, I'm not going to judge whether or not you were or were not abducted by space aliens. Again, I'm just looking for a writing sample that I would not grade, but it would count as your attendance. So this is your first time in being able to utilize either Microsoft Word or Google Docs or whatever word processing program you use, and then to save it to PDF, and then to send that PDF to my email, which is Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, @gcc.mass.edu. And if you run into any technological snags, please don't panic. Remember that you can always ask for an extension. I'll be happy to grant them to you. So if you're having difficulty sending it to me, just let me know. We'll work it out, and then I'll take it after the deadline. But ideally, you would be able to hand this in by Tuesday, the 14th at 10 a.m. So if you are watching this video for Monday, that gives you a 24-hour plus period in which to do your writing sample. And what I will do is I will read all those and write some brief comments, probably just welcoming you to the class, return them to your email. This will be your GCC email. You should be sending me these assignments through your GCC email. So again, you can practice using that resource if you haven't already done so. Again, if you're running into difficulties, I'll be happy to help you as well. And what we'll do next class is probably talk about libraries, though if it turns out that we can't talk about libraries, I'll just go ahead and do something else. In my mind, this is all really introduction, and the class doesn't really begin until the 20th of September, which is week 3. By that point, you should have gotten your textbooks and be pretty settled, where we can begin to talk about some of the elements of the textbook, specifically about reading well, summarizing and paraphrasing, and ways to be successful in college. So those are the readings that I had assigned for you to have read by the 20th. So I hope you're all doing well. I'm doing well. I look forward to reading your writing sample, and we will continue on next class. Take care. Bye-bye.